I ended up at a funeral for my buddy Henry's dad. I wasn't really up for funerals or anything like that, but Henry asked me to come along, and I figured I owed him the support. I never thought that day, and especially the night after, would stick with me like it did. The funeral itself was held on a chilly afternoon at a modest church. Inside, there were only a few rows of wooden pews, and everyone looked worn out and sad. People around me exchanged hushed words, and the pastor's voice droned on about loss and remembrance. I wasn't really paying close attention. I was more focused on trying to stay out of the way and just get through the service. When it was all over, Henry and I climbed into my old car and drove away in silence for a while. The drive felt numb, like I was in a daze. Later that same night, Henry called me on the phone with a hesitant tone. He explained that he had to head back to the cemetery. There were a few things he needed to finalize at his dad's grave. Some paperwork, a couple of small tokens, I guess. I wasn't too thrilled about the idea of another trip to a place already heavy with grief, but I didn't argue. I ended up driving with him, mostly out of a sense of solidarity. When we reached the cemetery, Henry parked near the gate and told me he'd be right back after taking care of his business inside. I sat in the car for a bit, listening to the nighttime sounds. After a while, I decided to get out and stretch my legs. I needed to shake off the stiffness and clear my head. I stepped out into the cemetery's cool night air. The place wasn't huge, but it was old. Rows of worn gravestones, some chipped and covered in moss, were scattered among patches of overgrown grass. I started walking slowly along one of the paths, thinking about how surreal it was to be there so late at night. I joked to myself, this place gives me the creeps, but I guess it's just another part of the job tonight. Then something strange happened. As I passed one of the older gravestones, I saw something fall. I couldn't tell what it was. It might have been a scrap of paper or a small, unidentifiable object, but it tumbled off the side of the stone with a soft, almost imperceptible clatter onto the dirt below. Curious, I knelt down to take a closer look, expecting to see some kind of note or a lost trinket. But when I got nearer, there was nothing there. The ground was just a mix of loose dirt and a few dead leaves, disturbed by my own movement. I stood up, feeling a bit foolish for overreacting. I turned around to head back toward the car, but out of nowhere there was this odd sensation, like something was blocking my throat. It wasn't painful, but it was unmistakable. A tight, uncomfortable pressure that made it hard to swallow, or even breathe normally for a second. I stopped dead in my tracks, glancing around the dark, empty rows of tombstones. There wasn't a soul in sight, and yet for a brief moment, I felt as if something had brushed against me. I couldn't tell if it was real or just my imagination. Trying to shake off the feeling, I started walking again. Just as I was about to reach the car, I felt it again, a light touch on my shoulder. I whipped around immediately, my pulse racing, but there was nobody there. I couldn't figure out if I was just spooked by the quiet or if something truly odd was happening. I dove into the car and slammed the door shut behind me. Henry hadn't come back out of the cemetery yet, so I sat there for a few minutes in thick silence, my mind reeling from the unexplained sensations. I didn't mention a word to Henry when he finally reappeared and slid into the passenger seat. He looked just as quiet and distracted as I felt. We drove off slowly from the cemetery, but after a few minutes, I started feeling sick. I tried to focus on the passing scenery outside the window, but the nausea just grew stronger. Finally, I pulled over to the side of a lonely stretch of road. I parked near a clump of bushes and got out, needing a moment away from the enclosed space of the car. I ended up leaning over and throwing up, just a messy, heaving moment that left me feeling weak and disoriented. Once I felt a little better, I climbed back into the car. Henry didn't say much during that time, and neither did I. I'm not one to usually believe in any kind of supernatural stuff, but that night made me question a few things I'd always taken for granted. I never brought it up with Henry afterward. I try to chalk it up to a mix of stress, the heaviness of loss, and the eerie atmosphere of an old cemetery at night. Maybe you've had moments like this too, where you're going about your business and suddenly feel like something just isn't right. I'm Lindsay. I grew up in a small town. I used to take shortcuts all the time because I was always in a hurry to get to my friend Heidi's house after school. One of those shortcuts was through an old cornfield on the edge of town. I just left school with my backpack slung over my shoulder. The corn was tall enough that it blocked a lot of the sky. I was in a hurry because Heidi's mom had promised we'd be baking cookies together. So I wasn't thinking about any danger or weird stuff. I just kept my eyes ahead. As I was making my way through the field, I saw a car parked right near the edge of the corn, its headlights off, and it looked like it had been sitting there for a while. I slowed down, thinking it was someone else taking the shortcut, but the car's engine started up and the driver slowly got out. I caught a glimpse of him standing there. He was a middle-aged guy, a bit on the heavy side. I was feeling a little weirded out, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just lost or something. I kept walking, trying not to show that I was a bit unnerved. I thought to myself, it's nothing, just some random guy. I didn't even turn around until I was almost out of the field. But when I reached the little dirt road that ran along the field's edge, I saw him again. This time he was walking slowly toward me. He had that same look, and he was holding something. It was a small, battered wallet in his hand. In a scratchy, low voice, he said, "Hey, did you drop your wallet?" I stopped dead in my tracks. I shook my head and said, "No, I didn't." I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I just turned and kept walking down the road, trying to act like nothing was happening. I walked pretty fast after that. I could see him following at a distance. The more I sped up, the more I felt that odd mix of fear and disbelief. I couldn't understand why a random man would be so interested in me. I got to the point where the road started to get busier, with a few parked cars and a small store on the corner. If I got to a place with more people around, he wouldn't be able to keep up. But then he came back. This time, in his car, he drove up fast, like he was in a hurry, and when he stopped right in front of me, I saw him lean out the window. Okay, this is definitely not normal. The window rolled down, and I saw his hand reaching out. It looked like he was trying to grab mine. And that's when I noticed the odd thing he was holding. A thick, dark cable that dangled from his hand, as if he was ready to use it for something. I could barely make sense of what was happening as he reached toward me. "Hey, wait up," he called. His voice a mix of urgency and something I couldn't quite place. I didn't know whether to run or call out, but instinct took over, and I bolted. I ran down the road as fast as I could. I didn't look back too much. I just kept running until I reached a cluster of houses. I remember stopping near a parked car and catching my breath, trying to make sense of it all. I dialed 911 as soon as I got to a safe spot. They searched around for a while, but they never did find that man. I've tried to forget about that night, and life went on normally, or at least as normally as it can in a small town. It's been years now. The police never found the man, and my family eventually stopped asking. I just try to live my life. I never did see that man again, and I guess that's what makes it more creepy. I'll always remember that day. It was a pretty ordinary evening. I had just left the salon where I'd gone for a quick trim and blow-dry. I left feeling a bit lighter, like a small weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Stepped out into the cool air, plugged in my earbuds, and started walking home. As I was heading down the block, I thought it was just a guy in the neighborhood, but the way he kept matching my pace made me uneasy. I wasn't sure if he was on foot or if he was waiting for me in his car. I even slowed down for a moment near a cafe to see if he'd appear. But there was no one else around, just a couple of people sitting outside drinking coffee. The street I was on is pretty normal. There's a mix of older brick houses and some newer apartment buildings. A couple of cars passed by. I made a mental note to be a bit more careful, but honestly, I just tried to shake off the feeling. I even stopped by a small convenience store for a bottle of water, and while I was paying, I kept glancing out the window. I swear I saw a blue car parked a few houses down, its windows a bit too dark, almost like it was hiding something. I got back on the sidewalk and walked the rest of the way home, trying not to let my imagination get the better of me. But once I got inside my apartment, the uneasy feeling didn't leave. I locked the door behind me and tried to brush it off, turning on the TV to distract myself. I sat on my worn-out sofa with the remote in hand, flipping through channels until I eventually dozed off. I wasn't expecting what happened next. Later that same night, I woke up to a soft thud by the front door. I listened closely, trying to figure out if it was the wind or something else. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel. I got up quietly, still in my pajamas, and went over to the window. There, in the dim light of a street lamp, was that same blue car parked right in front of my house. Its headlights were off, and everything looked eerily still. I couldn't believe my eyes. I watched from behind the curtain as the car slowly rolled forward until it was almost at my driveway. Then the door opened, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a jacket. What really got to me was that he had a small camera slung around his neck. He walked around the front of my house, stopping every so often as if he was taking pictures of something specific. My front door, the mailbox, maybe even the flower bed by the window. This is insane. Why would someone be doing this? After a few minutes, he got back into the car and it slowly drove off. I don't know what to do. I called the police. They assured me help was on the way and that I should stay inside and lock all my doors. I tried to calm myself by repeating that over and over, but I couldn't shake the terror. I sat by the window, peeking out occasionally. Some time passed, and I heard the sound of a knock on my door. I almost didn't answer because I was so scared, but I eventually did. Standing there was a police officer in a dark uniform. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Dan. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" he asked in a low voice. I recounted everything. The strange feeling of being followed after the salon, the suspicious blue car I saw near the convenience store, and finally, the man with the camera outside my house. Officer Dan took notes and asked for more details. What the car looked like, if I noticed anything unusual about the man, anything at all. I told him it was an old blue car. The paint was faded, and I think it might have had a dent on the left side, but I can't be sure. And the guy, I didn't catch his face. It was too dark, and he kept his hat pulled down. He said, "We'll check the area, ma'am. We have a patrol car nearby, but it seems the vehicle has left by now." I texted my friend Mac to let him know what was happening. He said, "That sounds really creepy, Ashley. Maybe keep your phone close, and don't hesitate to call if you need anything." His words were kind, but they didn't make me feel any safer. I'm not sure if he was targeting me specifically, or if it was just random. I suppose I just have to live with the uncertainty, hoping that it was just a one-time scare. I'm still keeping an eye out, and I'm not sure what to do if it happens again.